The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Wyatt, Missouri station, as dust billowed around its wheels, and Theodora Parker clutched her contract tightly in her gloved hands, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. She had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, but the promise of security and perhaps someday love had been enough to convince her to leave behind the ashes of her former life in Boston. Theodora Thea, to those who knew her, smoothed down her travel-worn navy blue dress as she stepped down from the coach. At 22, she was perhaps a bit older than most brides-to-be, but circumstances hadn't allowed her the luxury of a traditional courtship. The drought of 1874 had devastated her family's finances, and after the fever took both her parents last winter, she'd been left with nothing but debts and desperate choices. "First time in Wyatt, madam?" the driver asked as he handed down her trunk. "Yes," she replied, attempting a brave smile. "I'm to meet my fiancé, Mr. Edward Ramsey." The driver's expression shifted, nearly imperceptible, but Thea caught it, a slight tightening around the eyes, a forced politeness. "Right then. Good luck to you, miss." Before she could question him, he'd climbed back onto his seat and snapped the reins, leaving her alone on the dusty Main Street. Clutching her small valise, she surveyed the town. Wyatt wasn't large, a single main street with wooden buildings lining both sides, a few cross streets with smaller establishments and houses. It had the raw, unfinished look of a place still growing, still finding its identity in the vast frontier. A man approached, tall and broad-shouldered, in a black suit that appeared a touch too formal for the dusty surroundings. "Miss Parker, I presume?" He removed his hat, revealing slicked-back brown hair. "I'm Sheriff Roland Davis. Mr. Ramsey asked me to meet you and escort you to his property." Thea frowned. "Mr. Ramsey couldn't come himself," the sheriff cleared his throat. "He's indisposed at the moment. Business matters." He offered his arm. "Your trunk will be delivered later. May I escort you to a carriage?" Something felt wrong, but Thea had nowhere else to go. She'd spent nearly everything she had on the journey west. She allowed the sheriff to lead her to a waiting buggy, her contract still clutched in her hand like a talisman. As they traveled the dusty road out of town, Sheriff Davis made polite conversation about the weather and the town's recent growth, but there was tension in his manner. After about 20 minutes, they turned onto a private drive leading to a respectable 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch. The property looked well-maintained, with a large barn and several outbuildings. "This is Ramsey's place," the sheriff said, helping her down. "I'll just announce you." Before he could finish, the front door opened and a woman stepped out. She was perhaps 30, with auburn hair and a pretty, if tired, face. She wore a simple house dress and an expression of confused curiosity. "Sheriff, who's this?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Davis removed his hat again, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Ramsey, this is Miss Parker from Boston." Thea's blood turned to ice. "Mrs. Ramsey," the woman's eyes widened. "Yes, I'm Margaret Ramsey, Edward's wife." Time seemed to stop as the two women stared at each other. Thea's hand tightened on her contract, the paper crinkling beneath her fingers. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. "I have a contract. Mr. Ramsey agreed to marry me. I'm his mail-order bride." Margaret Ramsey paled, her hand going to her throat. "That's impossible. We've been married for 8 years." Before either woman could speak further, a man emerged from the house. Edward Ramsey was handsome in a conventional way, with light brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His expensive clothes suggested prosperity. His face, however, showed naked panic when he saw Thea. "You weren't supposed to arrive until next week," he blurted. The admission hung in the air, damning. "Edward." Margaret's voice was barely audible. "What is this woman talking about?" Ramsey's expression hardened. "Take her back to town, Sheriff. This is all a misunderstanding." "I have a contract." Thea pulled the paper from her reticule, her hands shaking. "You signed it, Mr. Ramsey. You sent for me." "Worth less than the paper it's printed on," Ramsey sneered, all pretense of civility vanishing. "You have no legal standing here." Margaret's face crumpled. "Edward, how could you?" Sheriff Davis looked torn between duty and disgust. "Ramsey, you can't just—" "I most certainly can," Ramsey cut in. "This woman has no claim on me or my property. I want her removed." "Edward, please," Margaret pleaded. "At least let her stay the night." "She has nowhere to go." "Absolutely not," Ramsey declared. "Sheriff, remove her or I'll charge her with trespassing." Thea stood frozen, humiliation and despair washing over her in alternating waves. She'd spent everything to get here, burned all her bridges. And now— "I'll take her," came a deep voice from behind them. They all turned to see a man on horseback at the edge of the yard. He sat tall in the saddle, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about him, a quiet authority that made them all take notice. He dismounted in one fluid motion and approached, spurs jingling softly with each step. As he came closer, Thea could see he was tall, with broad shoulders narrowed to a lean waist. He wore practical clothes, denim pants, a blue shirt, and a leather vest, all showing the dust of the trail. His face was tanned from the sun, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her, a striking blue-green that reminded her of the sea she'd left behind. "Zane O'Brien," Sheriff Davis acknowledged with a nod that seemed both respectful and cautious. "This isn't your concern." "Seems like it is now." O'Brien's voice had a gentle drawl, but there was steel beneath it. "Can't have a lady stranded with nowhere to go." His gaze shifted to Thea, assessing but not unkind. "Madam." "This is a private matter," Ramsey blustered. O'Brien ignored him, focusing on Thea. "My ranch is about 3 miles north of town. I've got a cabin for the foreman, but it's sitting empty right now. It's not fancy, but it's clean and private. You're welcome to stay there while you figure things out." "How dare you interfere in my affairs?" Ramsey demanded. O'Brien turned to him then, and something in his expression made Ramsey step back. "Your affairs? Seems to me you've got one too many of those already." He nodded toward the contract in Thea's hand. "That paper might not hold up in court, but we all know what it represents. You made a commitment you had no intention of honoring." "She has no proof." "I reckon everyone in town will have an opinion on that," O'Brien cut in mildly. "Including your business partners." Ramsey paled. O'Brien turned back to Thea. "Miss Parker, I can offer you honest work and a safe place to stay. No strings, no contract, just a helping hand until you decide what you want to do next." Thea stared at this stranger who had appeared like something from a dime novel, offering rescue when she needed it most. Everything about him screamed danger, from the gun at his hip to the intensity in his eyes. And yet, instinct told her he was the safest option she had. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. A smile touched his lips, transforming his stern features. "Let's just say I've got no patience for men who don't honor their word." He held out his hand. "What do you say?" Thea took a deep breath. She looked at Ramsey, at his furious, calculating face, at Margaret, whose world had just shattered, at the sheriff, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to truly intervene. Then she looked at Zane O'Brien's outstretched hand, calloused and strong. She placed her hand in his. "I accept your offer, Mr. O'Brien." His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. "Call me Zane." He looked at the sheriff. "Davis, I'd appreciate if you'd have her trunk delivered to my place when it arrives. The sheriff nodded, looking relieved at this solution. "I'll see to it." "You can't just take her," Ramsey protested, though with less conviction now. O'Brien's smile disappeared. "She's making her own choice, Ramsey. Something you didn't give her the courtesy of before." He turned to Margaret. "Madam, I'm sorry for your trouble." Margaret nodded, her eyes full of pain but also a strange gratitude. O'Brien led Thea to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion. "Ever ridden before?" he asked. "Not like this," she admitted. "Nothing to it." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her in one smooth motion. "Hold the saddle horn." Thea felt the solid wall of his chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins. She'd never been this close to a man before, and her heart hammered with a combination of fear, embarrassment, and something else she couldn't name. As they rode away, she couldn't help looking back once. Margaret stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. Edward Ramsey was already storming into the house. Sheriff Davis watched them go with an inscrutable expression. "Don't worry about them," Zane said quietly near her ear. "Ramsey's been playing fast and loose with business deals for years. This is just the first time he's been caught." "I've lost everything," Thea whispered, reality crashing down on her. "My home, my money, my future." She felt him shake his head. "No, madam, you've just lost an illusion. The future's still out there waiting." As they rode toward the unknown, Thea clutched her worthless contract in one hand and the saddle horn in the other, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or perhaps the first right decision. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when they arrived at the O'Brien ranch. Unlike Ramsey's neatly manicured property, this was a working ranch, sprawling and vital. A large barn stood opposite a handsome main house built of stone and timber. Several smaller buildings were scattered around the property, and in the distance, Thea could see cattle grazing on rolling hills. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed by the scope of it. "Been in my family for 15 years, Zane replied, a note of pride in his voice. "My father started with nothing but 20 acres and a dream. Now we run over 500 head of cattle." He guided the horse toward a small but sturdy cabin about 100 yards from the main house. "That's the foreman's cabin I mentioned. My last man moved on about a month ago, heading to California with gold fever." As they approached, a middle-aged woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. She had silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and a face that looked accustomed to smiling. "Mrs. Holloway," Zane called. "We've got a guest." The woman shaded her eyes against the setting sun. "So I see. 'Bout time you brought home something prettier than a stray dog or injured calf." Zane chuckled and dismounted, then reached up to help Thea down. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, and for a moment as he lowered her to the ground, they were face to face, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his sea-colored eyes. He stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "Miss Theodora Parker, this is Mrs. Holloway, who keeps the house running and makes sure I don't starve. Mrs. Holloway, Miss Parker needs a place to stay for a while." The older woman's eyes were kind but shrewd as she assessed Thea. "Got yourself in a bind, did you, child?" Thea straightened her spine. "I was to be married, but discovered upon arrival that the gentleman in question was already married." Mrs. Holloway's expression darkened. "Ramsey," she said, making the name sound like a curse. "Heard rumors he was looking for an Eastern bride. Didn't think he'd have the gall to go through with it." "You know him?" Thea asked, surprised. "Everyone knows everyone's business in a town like Wyatt," Zane said, taking the reins of his horse. "Mrs. Holloway, could you get Miss Parker settled in the cabin? I need to seat a ranger here, and then I'll bring over some supper." "Of course. Come along, dear. You look dead on your feet." Thea realized suddenly how exhausted she was. The journey had been long, and the emotional toll of the day's revelations was catching up to her. She followed Mrs. Holloway to the cabin, acutely aware of Zane watching them go before leading his horse toward the barn. The cabin was simple but, as promised, clean. It consisted of one main room with a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, a modest bed in the corner, and a pot-bellied stove for heat. A small adjoining room held a washstand and chamber pot. "It's not much," Mrs. Holloway said, bustling around to open windows and let in fresh air, "but it's private and safe." "It's perfect," Thea replied honestly. After weeks of travel and the day's ordeal, even this modest shelter seemed like a luxury. "I can't thank Mr. O'Brien enough for his kindness." Mrs. Holloway paused in her work, studying Thea with a penetrating gaze. "Zane's a good man, the best I know. He won't take advantage of your situation if that's what you're worried about." Thea felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I wasn't—" "Yes, you were," the older woman said, not unkindly. "And you'd be a fool not to be concerned, alone as you are. But I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His father was my husband's best friend, and when they both passed within a year of each other, Zane insisted I stay on here. He's got a strong sense of what's right, and he'd cut off his own hand before he'd harm a woman." Relieved but embarrassed that her thoughts had been so transparent, Thea nodded. "Thank you for telling me." "That said," Mrs. Holloway continued, her tone sharpening, "this is still the frontier and appearances matter. Your reputation is all you have out here. I'll be bringing your meals and checking on you regular, so folks won't have cause to talk." "I understand," Thea said, grateful for the woman's practical concern. "I don't intend to impose for long, as soon as I can earn enough for passage back east. And what's waiting for you there, Mrs.?" Holloway asked bluntly. The question hit Thea like a physical blow. "Nothing," she admitted after a moment. "My parents are gone. Our home was sold to pay debts. I have distant cousins, but—" She trailed off, unwilling to explain how those relatives had made it clear that their charity had limits. Mrs. Holloway nodded as if this confirmed something. "Then maybe this is where you're meant to be." She patted Thea's arm. "Life has a way of taking us where we need to go, even when it feels like we're lost." Before Thea could respond, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Holloway opened it to reveal Zane, holding a tray laden with food. The rich aroma of beef stew made Thea's stomach growl embarrassingly. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, stepping in and setting the tray on the table. "Mrs. Holloway's stew is the best in the county." "False flattery will get you nowhere," the older woman said, but she looked pleased. "I need to get back and finish the baking for tomorrow. Miss Parker, I'll bring breakfast in the morning, but you come to the main house if you need anything before then." After she left, an awkward silence fell. Zane stood near the door, hat in hand, while Thea hovered by the table. "You should eat while it's hot," he finally said. "Won't you join me?" The invitation slipped out before she could consider its propriety. He hesitated, then nodded. "Just for a few minutes." They sat at the small table, and Thea realized how hungry she was as she tasted the hearty stew. For a while, they ate in silence, but it was surprisingly comfortable. "I owe you an explanation," she said at last, "about how I came to be in this situation." "You don't owe me anything," he replied, his voice gentle. "Nevertheless," she set down her spoon. "After my parents died, I was left with nothing but debts. I worked as a school teacher, but the salary barely covered my room and board. When I saw Mr. Ramsey's advertisement in the newspaper," she broke off, embarrassed. "Looking for a refined Eastern lady of good family to share in the prosperity of a successful rancher," Zane finished for her. "I saw it too. Half the town was talking about it." "Yes, he seemed." respectable in his letters. Said he wanted a companion, someone educated to help him in social settings as his business grew. He sent train fare and a contract. She laughed bitterly. I was so desperate. I never questioned why a prosperous man would need to send thousands of miles for a wife. Don't blame yourself, Zane said firmly. Ramsey's got investments in the railroad and mining companies. Word is, he's been trying to break into St. Louis society. A refined Eastern wife would have helped his image. But he already had a wife. Margaret was a local girl, daughter of a farmer. Pretty, but not the sort to impress business partners from the city. His expression was grim. I'm guessing he planned to set you up somewhere else, keep two households. The thought made Thea's stomach turn. How could he think that would work? Ramsey's arrogant. Thinks his money makes him untouchable. Zane's jaw tightened. He's broken more than business contracts around here. Something in his tone made Thea look at him more closely. You have history with him. Zane stood abruptly. That's a story for another time. He moved toward the door. You should rest. It's been a long day. Mr. O'Brien, Zane, she corrected when he raised an eyebrow. I don't know how to thank you. No need. We take care of our own out here. But I'm not one of your own, she pointed out. I'm a stranger. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Not anymore. He settled his hat on his head. I meant what I said about work. I need help with the books and correspondence. Ranch this size generates a lot of paperwork, and I don't have the patience or the handwriting for it. If you're willing, I'd pay fair wages. Hope flared in her chest. I'd be very grateful for the opportunity. Good, we'll start tomorrow. He tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Parker. Thea, she said. Please call me Thea. A smile touched his lips. Good night, Thea. After he left, she sat for a long time at the table, trying to make sense of the day's events. She'd arrived expecting to meet her future husband and instead found betrayal, followed by unexpected kindness from a stranger. As she finally lay down in the small but comfortable bed, exhaustion overtook her. Her last conscious thought was that perhaps Mrs. Holloway was right. Maybe this was where she was meant to be after all. Thea awoke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the cabin windows and the distant sounds of a ranch coming to life. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, but then yesterday's events rushed back. The confrontation at Ramsey's farm, the humiliating discovery, and the enigmatic rancher who had offered her sanctuary. A knock at the door roused her fully. She hastily smoothed her hair and straightened her rumpled dress before opening it to find Mrs. Holloway bearing a tray with breakfast. "Good morning, dear," the older woman said cheerfully. "Brought you some flapjacks and bacon. Figured you could use a hearty meal to start your day." "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. You're very kind." Thea accepted the tray gratefully. "Nonsense. It's nice having another woman around." She bustled into the cabin. "Your trunk arrived late last night. Zane had the boys bring it over." She pointed to the large trunk now sitting at the foot of the bed. "I took the liberty of bringing some wash water, too. It's on the stand in the back room." Thea's eyes filled with tears at this simple kindness. "I don't know what I would have done if Mr. O'Brien hadn't come along yesterday." Mrs. Holloway's face softened. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, child. Now eat up." "Zane said to tell you he'll be by in an hour to show you the office and explain your duties." After Mrs. Holloway left, Thea ate quickly, then gratefully used the wash water to freshen up. She unpacked a clean dress from her trunk, a practical gray cotton with white trim, and changed, feeling more human with each passing minute. True to his word, Zane appeared at the cabin precisely an hour later. In the clear morning light, Thea was struck again by how handsome he was in a rugged, unpretentious way. Today he wore a clean white shirt with his denim pants and leather vest, and his dark hair was damp, as if he'd just washed it. "Morning," he greeted her with a nod. "Sleep well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "Good. I'll show you the office now if you're ready." She followed him to the main house, a spacious two-story structure built of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Inside, the main floor consisted of a large living area with a massive stone fireplace, a dining room, and a well-appointed kitchen where Mrs. Holloway reigned. Zane led her to a room off the main hallway, a small but pleasant office with a large desk, several filing cabinets and bookshelves lining one wall. "It's not much," he said, gesturing around the room. "My father was more concerned with building the ranch than keeping records. I've tried to be more organized, but—" He shrugged. Thea surveyed the stacks of papers on the desk and the haphazardly filled ledgers on the shelves. "It could use some attention," she agreed diplomatically. A smile tugged at his lips. "That's a polite way of saying it's a mess." She couldn't help but smile back. "Perhaps a bit." He showed her the ledgers, the filing system, such as it was, and explained the basics of the ranch's operations. "We've got 4 full-time hands, plus extra men during roundup and branding. I handle the cattle and land management, but the paperwork—" He ran a hand through his hair. "It piles up fast. I can see that." Thea was already organizing the papers into neat stacks. "I worked as a bookkeeper for my father's small shipping business before I became a teacher." "This isn't so different. You were a bookkeeper." He sounded impressed. "My father believed women should be educated in practical matters, not just accomplishments like music and art." She smiled at the memory. "He said a woman with a head for figures would never be taken advantage of." Something flickered in Zane's eyes. "Wise man, he was," she said softly. "I miss him very much." An awkward silence fell. Zane cleared his throat. "Well, I'll leave you to it. I need to check on the herd in the north pasture. Mrs. Holloway's around if you need anything." "Mr. O'Brien," she called as he reached the door. "What about payment? We didn't discuss terms." He turned back. "Room and board plus $30 a month." Thea's eyes widened. That was more than she'd made as a teacher. "That's very generous." "It's fair for the work," he said firmly. "We'll settle up at the end of each month." After he left, Thea sat at the desk and took a deep breath. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The hours flew by as she sorted through the chaotic piles, creating organized stacks by type and date. She discovered invoices that hadn't been recorded in the ledgers, receipts that hadn't been filed, and correspondence that needed replies. By midday, she had a clear picture of the ranch's financial situation, which, she was pleased to see, was quite sound despite the disorganized records. Mrs. Holloway brought her a sandwich and coffee at noon. "My goodness," the older woman exclaimed, looking around the now orderly office. "I haven't seen this room looking so tidy since Mr. O'Brien Sr. was alive." "There's still much to do," Thea said, "but at least now I can see what needs attention. Zane will be mighty pleased. That boy can track a stray calf for miles, but ask him to find a bill of sale from last month and he's hopeless." Mrs. Holloway chuckled. "Speaking of, he asked if you'd join us for supper tonight. Said he wants to hear your thoughts on the books." "Of course," Thea agreed, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the thought of dining with Zane. She worked until the light began to fade, then returned to her cabin to freshen up before supper. From her trunk, she selected her best dress, a deep blue cotton with a modest lace collar. It wasn't fancy by Eastern standards, but it was clean and becoming, and it brought out the blue in her eyes. The main house was warm and inviting in the evening light. Lamps cast a golden glow over the living room, and the aroma of roasting beef filled the air. Zane was standing by the fireplace when she entered, staring into the flames with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned at her entrance, and for a moment he simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You clean up nice," he finally said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean, you look lovely." "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush rise in her cheeks. "So do you." He had changed as well, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed. Mrs. Holloway bustled in from the kitchen. "Supper's ready. Come along before it gets cold." The dining room was simple but elegant, with a polished oak table that could seat 12. Tonight, only 3 places were set at one end of the table. The meal was delicious roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and green beans from Mrs. Holloway's garden. Conversation flowed more easily than Thea expected. Zane asked about her progress with the books, and she explained what she'd found and what still needed to be done. "I can have everything properly organized within a week," she promised. "Though I did notice some discrepancies in the cattle counts from last fall's roundup." Zane nodded, his expression darkening. "We lost some stock last year, rustlers." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. It happens. Less now that we've increased patrols." He took a sip of water. "Sheriff Davis caught the main culprits, but I suspect they had help from someone with knowledge of our operations." Mrs. Holloway made a disapproving noise. "That was Ramsey's doing, if you ask me, right after you refused to sell him that north pasture land." Thea looked up sharply. "Mr. Ramsey tried to buy part of your ranch." Zane's jaw tightened. "He's been trying to expand his holdings, claims he needs more land for some development scheme. Offered a good price, but that land's not for sale at any price." "Because of the water rights," Mrs. Holloway explained to Thea. "That pasture has the best spring on the property. Sell that, and you're at the mercy of whoever owns it." "And Ramsey's not a man I'd care to be at the mercy of," Zane added grimly. Thea thought of Margaret Ramsey's tired eyes and the way she'd seemed to shrink when her husband entered the room. "No, I imagine not." After dinner, Mrs. Holloway shooed them into the living room while she cleared the table. "No sense you sitting here watching me work. Go on and enjoy the fire." In the living room, an awkward silence fell. Thea stood by the mantel, looking at the photographs displayed there, a stern-faced man who must be Zane's father, a pretty woman with Zane's sea-colored eyes, and a younger Zane in formal attire, looking uncomfortable. "Your parents?" she asked, nodding toward the photographs. "Yes. My father died 5 years ago. My mother's been gone longer, since I was 15. I'm sorry." She touched the frame containing his mother's image. "You have her eyes, so they tell me." He moved to stand beside her. "Your parents, were they ill long before they passed?" Thea nodded. "The fever took them both within a week of each other. My father first, then my mother. I think she simply lost the will to fight after he was gone." She swallowed hard. "They were devoted to each other." "That's rare," he said softly. "Yes." She turned to face him. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. O'Brien, after you've spent the day untangling my financial records? I think you've earned the right." She smiled briefly. "Why aren't you married? A man with a successful ranch in the prime of life." He looked away, back at the photographs. "I was engaged once, 4 years ago." "What happened?" "She died. Typhoid." His voice was flat, emotionless. 3 weeks before the wedding." "I'm so sorry," Thea whispered. He shrugged, a gesture that didn't hide his pain as well as he might have hoped. "Life out here is hard. People die. You move on." "Is that what you've done? Moved on?" His eyes met hers, and the raw honesty there took her breath away. "No, not really." Before she could respond, Mrs. Holloway entered, breaking the moment. "Coffee's ready if you want it." They spent the rest of the evening in the comfortable flow of conversation, carefully steering away from personal topics. By the time Zane walked her back to her cabin, the awkwardness between them had faded, replaced by a tentative friendliness. "Thank you for dinner," she said as they reached her door, And for everything else, you're earning your keep, he replied. I haven't seen the office looking that good in years. Still, not many men would have done what you did yesterday. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. Get some rest. I'll see you in the morning. As she watched him walk away, silhouetted against the rising moon, Thea felt a strange mixture of emotions: gratitude, certainly, but also something deeper. A pull toward this solitary man with sad eyes and unexpected kindness. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Thea settled into life at the O'Brien ranch. Each day, she rose early, breakfasted with Mrs. Holloway, and spent the daylight hours in the office, bringing order to years of financial chaos. In the evenings, she sometimes dined with Zane and Mrs. Holloway, other times taking a simple meal in her cabin when Zane was working late with the cattle or meeting with neighboring ranchers. She came to understand the rhythm of ranch life: the early mornings, the long days of physical labor for the hands, the constant vigilance required to manage such a large operation. And she began to appreciate Zane's role at the center of it all. He was a fair but demanding boss, respected by his men for his willingness to work alongside them at the most difficult tasks. He knew every inch of his land, every animal in his herds. By the end of the week, she had the office in perfect order. The ledgers were up to date, the correspondence answered, the filing system completely reorganized. She was just putting the finishing touches on a new inventory system when Zane entered the office, his boots muddy from the fields. "You've been busy," he observed, looking around the transformed space. "I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of creating a new filing system and updating all the ledgers. Mind, it's remarkable." He examined the neat row of ledgers, each labeled by year and type. "I can actually find things now," she smiled, pleased by his approval. "I also took the opportunity to analyze your cattle operation. Based on the records, you're losing about 5% more calves than the average for this region." His eyebrows rose. "How would you know the regional average?" "Your father subscribed to several agricultural journals. They publish statistics." She handed him a sheet of paper covered in neat figures. "I believe the problem may be in the North Pasture. The records show a consistently higher loss rate there over the past 3 years. Zane studied the figures, his expression thoughtful. "That's where we've had the most trouble with predators. Mountain lions come down from the hills. Perhaps a more regular patrol schedule would help. I notice the men's time is allocated somewhat haphazardly." For a moment he looked surprised at her boldness, but then he nodded slowly. "You might be right. I'll speak with Hank about reorganizing the patrols." Emboldened by his receptiveness, Thea continued, "I've also drafted a letter to the Kansas City stockyards. They've been consistently underpaying based on the weight calculations. I've included evidence from the last 3 shipments." Zane examined the letter, his eyes widening as he read. "This is impressively thorough. They owe you nearly $800 by my calculations," she said. "I thought it was worth addressing." "800, he whistled softly. "I knew something was off, but I never had time to trace it properly." "That's why you hired me," she reminded him with a smile. He looked at her for a long moment, an expression in his eyes she couldn't quite interpret. "Best decision I've made in years." The words, simple as they were, sent a warm glow through her. She looked away, suddenly flustered. "I also found this," she said, changing the subject. She pulled out an old leather-bound ledger from a drawer. "It appears to be your father's original survey of the property. It shows a spring on the southeastern boundary that isn't marked on your current maps." Zane took the ledger, his expression sharpening with interest. "Are you certain? That area's been dry for as long as I can remember." "According to these notes, It was a reliable water source when your father first purchased the land. She pointed to a faded notation. He mentioned intending to develop it for the cattle, but I didn't find any record that he ever did. This could be valuable, Zane murmured, studying the old map. Especially with the drought conditions we've been facing. He looked up at her, a genuine smile lighting his face. You're full of surprises, Miss Parker. I try to be thorough, she said modestly. You're more than thorough. You're remarkable. The admiration in his voice made her blush. I think this calls for a celebration. Get your hat. I want to show you something. Puzzled but intrigued, Thea fetched her bonnet and minutes later found herself in Zane's buggy, heading away from the ranch house toward a part of the property she hadn't seen before. They traveled for nearly half an hour, cresting several hills until they reached a rise overlooking a stunning vista, rolling plains stretching to distant mountains, painted gold and pink by the setting sun. It's beautiful, she breathed as Zane helped her down from the buggy. My favorite spot on the ranch. He spread a blanket on a flat rock outcropping. Best place to watch the sunset. From a basket in the buggy, he produced a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, along with bread, cheese, and some early summer peaches. Not quite as fancy as Mrs. Holloway's dinner, but I thought you might enjoy the view. It's perfect, Thea said, genuinely touched by the gesture. They sat side by side on the blanket, sharing the simple meal as the sun sank lower on the horizon. The wine was sweet and light, just enough to warm Thea's cheeks and loosen the usual formality between them. How did you come to be a mail-order bride? Zane asked suddenly. If you don't mind my asking, you're educated, capable. Surely you had other options. Thea looked out at the horizon, considering how to answer. After my parents died, I discovered that my father's business had been failing for years. He'd borrowed heavily to keep it afloat, using our home as collateral. When he died, the creditors took everything. She took a sip of wine. I had enough saved for a few months of room and board, but teaching doesn't pay well and Boston is an expensive city. When I saw Mr. Ramsey's advertisement, it seemed like Providence. A fresh start, Zane supplied. Yes, and his letters were so proper, respectful. He wrote about wanting a partner, not just a wife, someone to help build a legacy. She shook her head ruefully. I was naive. Not naive, Zane countered. Hopeful, there's a difference. She gave him a grateful smile. What about you? Have you lived here all your life, born and raised? My father came west with nothing but determination and a talent for reading the land. He built this ranch acre by acre, against all odds. Pride was evident in his voice. He taught me everything I know about cattle, about weather patterns, about judging a man's character. He sounds like an impressive man. He was. Hard-headed, stubborn as a mule, but fair. Zane smiled at some memory. He always said a man's word is the only thing that truly belongs to him. Break it, and you've lost the most valuable thing you own. A philosophy more men should embrace, Thea said, thinking of Ramsey's duplicity. Indeed. Zane refilled their glasses. What will you do now? Do you still plan to return east? The question caught her off guard. In the flurry of work and settling in, she hadn't given much thought to her long-term plans. I'm not sure. There's nothing for me in Boston now. You could stay here, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Wyatt's growing. They'll need a school teacher soon. Perhaps. The idea held more appeal than she would have expected a week ago. Or I could continue working for you. I've enjoyed bringing order to your chaos, he chuckled. There's certainly plenty more chaos to tackle. They fell silent, watching as the sun slipped below the horizon in a final blaze of glory, painting the clouds in shades of crimson and gold. In the deepening twilight, Thea was acutely aware of Zane beside her, the solid warmth of his presence, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "We should head back," he said finally, reluctance evident in his voice. "It'll be dark soon." As they packed up the remains of their picnic, their hands brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a surprising jolt through Thea. She looked up to find Zane watching her, an unreadable expression in his eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let me help you into the buggy." The ride back to the ranch was mostly silent, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the soft sounds of the night and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. When they reached her cabin, Zane jumped down and came around to help her descend. "Thank you for this evening," she said as her feet touched the ground. "It was lovely. My pleasure." He hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said, Thea. You have a place here for as long as you want it." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. "Thank you." He held her gaze for a long moment, then stepped back with a slight bow. "Good night." As she watched him drive away, Thea realized with a start that for the first time since arriving in Wyatt, she wasn't thinking of her humiliation at Ramsey's hands or the desperate circumstances that had brought her west. Instead, she was thinking of sea-green eyes and the possibility of belonging. The next morning, Thea was at her desk early, working on a new inventory system for the ranch supplies, when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking out the window, she saw Sheriff Davis riding up, accompanied by another man she didn't recognize. Zane emerged from the barn to meet them, and even from a distance, Thea could see the tension in his posture as he spoke with the visitors. After a brief conversation, all three men headed toward the house. Moments later, Zane appeared in the office doorway. "Thea, could you join us in the living room? There's a matter that concerns you." Puzzled and slightly alarmed, she followed him to find Sheriff Davis and the stranger waiting. The unknown man was expensively dressed in a dark suit, with a gold watch chain across his vest and a look of smug confidence. "Miss Parker, this is Mr. Lowell, Edward Ramsey's attorney," Zane said, his voice carefully neutral. "He has something to discuss with you." The lawyer stepped forward with an oily smile. "Miss Parker, I represent Mr. Ramsey in a matter of some delicacy. It seems you are in possession of certain documents that belong to my client." "I don't understand," Thea said, though a sinking feeling in her stomach told her exactly what this was about. "The contract, Miss Parker," Lowell clarified. "Mr. Ramsey demands its return, along with all correspondence between you. He is prepared to offer $50 for your trouble." Anger flared in Thea's chest. "Your client misled me, sir. He entered into a contract fraudulently, knowing he was already married." "A most unfortunate misunderstanding," Lowell said smoothly. "However, the fact remains that the document contains Mr. Ramsey's signature on what could be misconstrued as a promise of marriage. As such, it could be damaging to his reputation if it fell into unfriendly hands. Are you threatening me, Mr. Lowell?" Thea asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Not at all. I'm simply explaining the situation. Mr. Ramsey is a prominent businessman with important connections. He's offering a generous settlement to avoid any unpleasantness." Sheriff Davis shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Parker, I should mention that while what Ramsey did was dishonest, it's not technically illegal. The contract wouldn't hold up in court. So I have no legal recourse," Thea said flatly. "I'm afraid not," the sheriff admitted. Zane, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "What exactly does Ramsey want?" "The return of all documents, a signed statement from Miss Parker that she makes no claim on Mr. Ramsey or his property, and her word that she will not discuss this matter with anyone." Lowell produced some papers from his briefcase. "I've prepared the necessary statements. Once signed, Mr. Ramsey will consider the matter closed." Thea felt sick. Ramsey wasn't just trying to get the contract back, he wanted to silence her completely, to erase any evidence of his deception. "And if I refuse?" Lowell's smile thinned. Mr. Ramsey would be forced to protect his interests by other means. Perhaps a charge of attempted extortion or slander. Legal battles can be so draining, especially for a young woman alone in a strange place. The threat was clear. Thea looked at Zane, whose face had hardened into a mask of controlled fury. "You can't be serious," Zane said to the lawyer. "Your client committed fraud. He's the one who should be worried about legal consequences." "Fraud is difficult to prove, Mr. O'Brien," Lowell replied. "Particularly when one party's word is significantly more influential than the others." Thea straightened her spine. "I need time to consider." "Mr. Ramsey expects an answer today," Lowell insisted. "Mr. Ramsey can expect whatever he likes," Zane cut in, his voice dangerously quiet. "Miss Parker will give her answer when she's ready, not before." Something in his tone made Lowell step back. "Very well. I'll return tomorrow morning, but I should warn you Mr. Ramsey's patience is not unlimited." He handed the papers to Thea. "These are for your review. Sheriff, shall we go?" After the men departed, Thea sank into a chair, the papers clutched in her trembling hands. "He wants to pretend it never happened," she said bitterly. "To erase me like a mistake in one of his ledgers." Zane knelt beside her chair. "You don't have to sign anything. I won't let him threaten you." "But you heard the sheriff. I have no legal standing." "Legality and justice aren't always the same thing," Zane said grimly. "Ramsey's worried about his reputation, his business dealings. That gives us leverage." "Us?" Thea looked at him in surprise. "You're not alone in this." His eyes held hers, fierce with determination. "I won't let him bully you into submission." The intensity of his commitment stunned her. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." Zane was quiet for a moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know enough," he finally said, his voice soft but sure. "I know you're honest and brave and smarter than half the men in this county put together. I know you didn't deserve what happened to you. And I know Ramsey needs to be held accountable for once in his privileged life." His words warmed her like sunshine after a long winter. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, a current of understanding passing between them that went beyond words. The spell was broken by Mrs. Holloway entering with a tray of coffee. "I thought you might need this after those visitors," she said, eyeing them with poorly concealed curiosity. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway," Thea said, straightening in her chair as Zane stood. "What are you going to do?" Mrs. Holloway asked bluntly after Zane explained the situation. Thea looked down at the papers in her hand, then at Zane. Something in his steady gaze gave her courage. "I'm not going to be silenced," she declared. "Mr. Ramsey wants to protect his reputation. Well, I want justice, and I won't get it by signing these papers." Zane smiled, a slow, approving smile that sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Then we have work to do before Mr. Lowell returns tomorrow." "What do you have in mind?" Thea asked. "I think it's time we paid a visit to the newspaper office in town," Zane replied, "and perhaps to some of Ramsey's business associates." Understanding dawned. "You want to use the same leverage he's using his reputation." "Exactly." Zane's expression was determined. "Ramsey values his standing in the community above all else. Let's see how he feels when that's threatened." That afternoon found Thea and Zane in Wyatt's modest business district, making strategic visits. Their first stop was the Wyatt Chronicle, where editor Samuel Wilson listened with increasing interest to Thea's story. "You have the original contract?" Wilson asked, scribbling notes. "Yes, and all his letters," Thea confirmed. "Each one signed by Edward Ramsey." Wilson whistled. "And he's married, has been for years." He shook his head. "That's quite a story, Miss Parker." One I'm sure your readers would find fascinating, Zane suggested. Indeed they would. Wilson tapped his pencil thoughtfully. Ramsey won't like it. Ramsey is trying to silence Miss Parker with threats, Zane said. Are you going to help him succeed? The editor straightened, professional pride clearly stung. I print the truth, O'Brien, always have. He turned to Thea. I'll need to see those documents, and I'll want a full statement from you. You'll have them, Thea promised. But not yet. Mr. Ramsey has sent his lawyer to intimidate me into returning everything and signing away my right to speak of this matter. Typical, Wilson muttered. When do you see the lawyer again? Tomorrow morning, Zane replied. We thought it might be helpful if Mr. Ramsey understood that his actions won't remain private regardless of what Miss Parker signs. A slow smile spread across Wilson's face. I believe I can be of assistance there. I'm having dinner with Mayor Thompson tonight. Perhaps I'll mention I'm working on an interesting story about a prominent local businessman. From the newspaper office, they visited the bank where Ramsey conducted his business, and then the office of a railroad executive who was considering Ramsey for investment in a new spur line. At each stop, they were careful not to make direct accusations, but they left behind the clear impression that Ramsey's character might not be as sterling as he presented. By the time they headed back to the ranch, word was spreading through Wyatt's small business community. Ramsey would know before nightfall that his secret wasn't safe. You think it will work? Thea asked as they rode home in Zane's buggy, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. Ramsey values his reputation and business connections above all else, Zane replied. The threat of public exposure will hit him where it hurts most. I don't want to destroy him, Thea said thoughtfully. I just want acknowledgement and assurance he won't do this to another woman. Zane glanced at her, admiration in his eyes. You're remarkably forgiving, she shrugged. Bitterness is a heavy burden to carry. I'd rather set it down and move forward. He was quiet for a moment, considering her words. You're quite extraordinary, you know. The simple statement, delivered with such genuine warmth, made Thea's cheeks flush. I'm just trying to handle this with dignity. Most people in your position would be out for blood, or at least compensation. Money won't restore what I lost, she said softly. My pride, my trust, my security. Zane's hands tightened on the reins. I wish I could give those things back to you. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. You've already given me more than you know, she told him. Safety, purpose, respect. Those aren't small gifts, Zane. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of perfect understanding that made Thea's heart beat faster. Then Zane looked away, his attention back on the road, but his expression remained thoughtful. As they approached the ranch, a rider came galloping toward them, one of Zane's ranch hands, his face urgent. Mr. O'Brien, he called, reining in beside the buggy. Mrs. Ramsey's at the house. Says she needs to speak with Miss Parker right away. Zane and Thea exchanged surprised looks. Margaret Ramsey, Thea asked. Here. Yes, madam. Mrs. Holloway put her in the parlor. She seems mighty upset. We'll be right there, Zane said, urging the horse to a faster pace. When they reached the ranch house, they found Margaret Ramsey sitting stiffly in the parlor, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She looked up as they entered, her face pale and drawn. Miss Parker, she said, rising. Thank you for seeing me. I know this is unexpected. Mrs. Ramsey, Thea acknowledged, unsure what to make of this visit. This is Mr. O'Brien. It's his ranch where I've been staying. Margaret nodded to Zane. Mr. O'Brien, I apologize for the intrusion, but I needed to speak with Miss Parker urgently. Would you like some privacy? Zane asked, already moving toward the door. No, please stay, Margaret said quickly. What I have to say concerns you as well, in a way. Zane nodded and remained standing near the fireplace as Thea took a seat across from Margaret. "Edward knows what you've been doing in town today," Margaret began without preamble. "He's furious. I've never seen him so angry." "I'm not surprised," Thea said carefully, "but I won't be silenced, Mrs. Ramsey." "I'm not asking you to be," Margaret replied, surprising her. "In fact, I came to thank you." "Thank me?" Margaret's hand stilled in her lap as she took a deep breath. "When you appeared at our home last week, it was a shock, but it was also a revelation. I've suspected for some time that Edward wasn't being faithful, but I never imagined he would go so far as to." She trailed off, then gathered herself. "You forced me to see the truth about my marriage." Thea didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. The truth is painful but necessary." Margaret straightened her shoulders. "I confronted Edward after you left. He denied everything at first, then tried to justify his actions. Said I wasn't the kind of wife who could help his business grow." Her voice was bitter. 8 years I've stood by him, managed his household, entertained his business associates, and it wasn't enough." "That's his failing, not yours," Thea said gently. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, I see that now." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded document. "I want you to have this." Thea accepted the paper and opened it. It was a bank draft for $500. "Mrs. Ramsey, I can't accept this." "It's not from Edward," Margaret clarified quickly. "It's from me. From my personal account money my father left me." "Edward doesn't know I still have it." She leaned forward earnestly. "You suffered because of my husband's actions. This is restitution." "It's very generous, but—" "Please," Margaret interrupted. "It would ease my conscience and—" She hesitated. "I'm leaving Edward. This will help me as well, in a way. A small act of justice before I go." "You're leaving?" Zane spoke for the first time since the conversation began. Margaret nodded, a new determination in her face. "I'm going to my sister in St. Louis. I've already written to her and she's expecting me." She turned back to Thea. "But before I go, I wanted to make sure you knew you have nothing to fear from Edward. I've made it clear to him that if he pursues any action against you, I will make public every detail of his indiscretions. And there are more than just you, Miss Parker." "You're blackmailing your own husband," Zane said, a note of reluctant admiration in his voice. "I prefer to think of it as insurance," Margaret replied with the ghost of a smile. "Edward values his reputation too much to risk it. He'll leave you alone now." Thea was stunned by this unexpected ally. "Thank you, Mrs. Ramsey." "Margaret, please." She rose to leave. "I should go. My train leaves in the morning." Zane stepped forward. "I'll have one of my men drive you back to town." "That's very kind, thank you." As they walked Margaret to the door, she paused and turned to Thea. "I hope you find happiness here, Miss Parker. You deserve it after what you've endured." After Margaret departed, Thea stood on the porch, the bank draft still in her hand, trying to process what had just happened. "Well," Zane said, coming to stand beside her, "that was unexpected." "She's stronger than she appears," Thea observed. "Most women are," Zane replied with a sidelong glance that made her flush. Thea looked down at the bank draft. "I'm not sure I should accept this." "Why not?" As she said, "It's restitution. It feels wrong somehow, taking her money." Zane considered this. What if you used it for something good, something that would help others? An idea began to form in Thea's mind. Like a school. Wyatt needs a proper school building. "That's a fine idea," Zane agreed. "A way to turn Ramsey's deception into something positive." Thea smiled, feeling as if a weight had lifted from her shoulders. The threat from Ramsey was neutralized, and she had the means to build something meaningful in this place that was starting to feel like home. "Thank you," she said, turning to Zane, "for standing with me through all this." "Always," he replied simply, the word a promise that warmed her more than she could express. The next morning, Mr. Lowell arrived as promised. his manner considerably less confident than the day before. Zane and Thea received him in the office, where Thea sat behind the desk, a position of authority that was not lost on the lawyer. "Miss Parker," Lowell began, removing his hat, "I understand you've had a visit from Mrs. Ramsey." "News travels fast," Thea observed coolly. "Indeed." Lowell cleared his throat. "In light of recent developments, Mr. Ramsey has reconsidered his position. He wishes to withdraw his previous demands and offers his sincere apologies for any inconvenience." Zane made a derisive sound. "Apologies don't compensate for fraud and attempted intimidation." "Nevertheless," Lowell continued, studiously ignoring Zane, "Mr. Ramsey hopes you will accept this as a gesture of goodwill." He placed an envelope on the desk. "And of course, he trusts that this concludes the matter to everyone's satisfaction." Thea didn't touch the envelope. "Mr. Lowell, please inform your client that I have no intention of pursuing this matter further, provided he understands that any attempt to interfere in my life or affairs will result in the immediate publication of the full story, with all supporting documents." Lowell nodded, a bead of sweat visible on his brow despite the cool morning. "I will convey your message. You can also tell him," Zane added, his voice hard, "that Miss Parker has friends in Wyatt now, friends who take a dim view of men who try to intimidate women." "I understand," Lowell said stiffly. He glanced at the envelope, still untouched on the desk. "The funds will be donated to the Wyatt School Building Fund," Thea finished for him. "I have no desire for Mr. Ramsey's money." After Lowell departed, Zane turned to Thea with a smile of genuine admiration. "You handled that perfectly." "I had good support," she replied, returning his smile. "So a school-building fund?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "It seems appropriate," Thea said. "Something good coming from something less than good." "And would this school need a teacher?" Zane's question was casual, but his eyes were intent. Thea's heart quickened. "Perhaps. Are you suggesting I apply for the position?" "I'm suggesting you'd be perfect for it." He leaned against the desk, suddenly serious. "Does that mean you're staying in Wyatt?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with more meaning than its simple words conveyed. Thea looked up at him, this man who had come to her rescue, who had stood beside her through the darkest moments, who looked at her with respect and something warmer growing in his eyes. "I think I am," she said softly. "I seem to have found a place where I belong." The smile that broke across Zane's face was like sunrise after a long night. "I'm glad to hear it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Very glad indeed." In the weeks that followed, life at the O'Brien ranch settled into a comfortable routine. Thea continued to manage the office, bringing a level of organization and efficiency that impressed even the neighboring ranchers who came to do business with Zane. Word spread about her skill with figures and correspondence, and soon she was helping other local businesses with their books on the side, earning her own income beyond her salary from the ranch. The Wyatt School project progressed rapidly. With Margaret Ramsey's money, and the additional funds from Edward Ramsey, which turned out to be a surprisingly generous amount, perhaps motivated by fear of exposure, the town council purchased land and began construction on a simple but sturdy schoolhouse. Thea was invited to serve on the committee overseeing the project, and her practical suggestions for the building's design were readily adopted. Edward Ramsey himself had left town shortly after Margaret's departure, heading to St. Louis on extended business, according to local gossip. Few expected him to return, especially after news broke that Margaret had filed for divorce, a scandalous development that provided the town with conversation fodder for weeks. Through it all, Thea's relationship with Zane continued to deepen. They worked side by side during the days, dined together in the evenings, and often spent hours talking by the fire after Mrs. Holloway retired for the night. He shared stories of his childhood on the ranch, of the father who had taught him to read the land and sky, of the mother whose gentle wisdom still guided his decisions. She told him about her life in Boston, her father's business successes and failures, her love of teaching and learning. But for all their growing closeness, Zane maintained a certain reserve. He never spoke of his feelings directly, never crossed the line from friendship to courtship. Sometimes Thea caught him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. But he would always look away, retreat behind the wall of propriety that seemed to constrain him. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Thea finally gathered her courage to broach the subject. "Zane," she began, her fingers nervously pleating the fabric of her skirt, "may I ask you something personal?" He turned to her, his face softened in the golden light. "Of course. That day when I arrived, why did you really help me? The truth." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I knew Ramsey was expecting an Eastern bride. Everyone did. When I saw you at his place, saw the way he treated you, it reminded me of something." "What?" Zane's jaw tightened. "My fiancée Alice, she was from Chicago, came west to teach at the school in Cedar Ridge, the next town over. We met at a harvest dance." A faint smile touched his lips at the memory. She was beautiful, smart, full of dreams about building a life out here. Thea waited, sensing there was more to the story than he'd told her before. "Before she met me, when she first arrived, Ramsey courted her, aggressively." She turned him down. She could see through his charm to the man beneath. He didn't take rejection well. Zane's voice hardened. He spread rumors about her, implied she was improper, made her position at the school uncomfortable. "That's despicable," Thea whispered. "It is." "I wanted to confront him, but Alice asked me not to. Said it would only make things worse, give the rumors credibility." His hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "When she got sick, Ramsey had the gall to send flowers, to play the concerned friend to everyone in town, while privately suggesting to some that her illness was something else, something shameful." "Oh, Zane." Thea reached out instinctively, covering his hand with hers. "After she died, I promised myself I'd never let him harm another woman if I could prevent it." He looked at her, his eyes fierce in the fading light. "When I saw you standing there, contract in hand, looking so lost and angry and brave all at once, I couldn't walk away." "So it was because of Alice," Thea said softly, a pang of disappointment slicing through her despite her best efforts. "At first," he admitted, "but then—" He turned his hand beneath hers, catching her fingers in a gentle grip. "Then it was because of you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Me?" "You, Thea Parker, with your meticulous ledgers and your compassionate heart and your determination to make something good out of something terrible." His voice was low, intense. "You, who walked into my disorganized life and somehow made everything clearer, brighter." "Zane," she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I've been holding back," he continued, "because I didn't want you to feel obligated. You came here under difficult circumstances, dependent on my help. It wouldn't have been right to speak of my feelings then. And now—" She prompted when he hesitated. "Now you've built your own place here. You have options, independence. If you wanted to leave tomorrow, you could." "But I don't want to leave," she said simply. His eyes searched hers. "No, no," she squeezed his hand. "I want to stay, here in Wyatt, with you." The last barriers in his expression fell away, revealing a vulnerability and hope that took her breath away. "I've been half in love with you since that first day," he confessed, "when you stood up to Ramsey with nothing but a worthless contract and your own courage. Only half. She teased, her heart soaring. A smile broke across his face. The other half came later, probably around the time you reorganized my filing system and found that lost spring on my father's map. They both laughed, the tension between them dissolving into something sweeter, more intimate. I should have spoken sooner, he said, sobering. But after Alice, I was afraid. Of what? Of feeling that kind of loss again. His thumb traced gentle patterns on her palm, but I've come to realize that not taking a chance on happiness is its own kind of loss. Thea's heart was full to bursting. I've been afraid too, she admitted. After Ramsey's deception, I wasn't sure I could trust my judgment again. And now, she smiled. Now I trust you and I trust us. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers up her arm. There's something I've been wanting to ask you, he said, his voice husky. Yes. From his pocket, he withdrew a small object that glinted in the last rays of the setting sun, a simple gold ring with a delicate emerald. This was my mother's, he said. My father gave it to her when they were starting out, before they had money for anything fancy. She always treasured it more than the grander rings he bought her later. Thea's breath caught as he slid from his chair to one knee before her. Theodora Parker, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Your last contract may have been worthless, but I'm hoping you'll consider mine. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you for all my days, to be honest and faithful, to stand beside you in good times and bad. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears of joy blurred her vision as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Zane O'Brien, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, and then rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. When his lips finally met hers, soft and questioning at first, then more certain, Thea felt as if all the pieces of her broken life had finally come together in a pattern more beautiful than she could have imagined. They were married on a crisp October day, with the aspen trees blazing gold against the blue Colorado sky. The ceremony was held at the newly completed schoolhouse, which would open for classes the following week with Thea as its teacher. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with ranchers and farmers from miles around. Mrs. Holloway wept openly throughout the ceremony, declaring afterward that she'd never seen a more beautiful bride or a happier groom. Sheriff Davis served as best man, while the editor's wife stood up with Thea. Even Margaret Ramsey sent her congratulations from St. Louis, along with a delicate lace handkerchief as a wedding gift. The reception lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting and more good wishes than Thea could count. As the festivities wound down, Zane led her outside to where his buggy waited, decorated with ribbons and flowers by the ranch hands. Ready to go home, Mrs. O'Brien? He asked, his eyes warm with love and promise. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. More than ready, Mr. O'Brien. As they drove away amid cheers and well wishes, Thea leaned against her husband's shoulder, marveling at the journey that had brought her here. She had come west with nothing but desperate hope and a contract that proved worthless. She was leaving with something infinitely more valuable, a contract of the heart, sealed with love and built on trust that would last a lifetime. Penny for your thoughts, Zane said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Thea smiled up at him, her heart full to overflowing. I was just thinking that sometimes the most unexpected detours lead to the most perfect destinations. His arm tightened around her. Welcome home, Thea. Welcome to where you belong. As the buggy carried them toward their future, Thea knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a home, but a love worth more than all the worthless contracts and broken promises in the world. This was real, this was lasting, This was true. And it was only the beginning. 2 years later, Thea stood on the porch of the O'Brien ranch house, watching as Zane rode in from the north pasture, their 8-month-old son James cradled securely in one arm. The baby was laughing, his small face alight with joy at the adventure of riding with his father. "There's your mama," she heard Zane say as they approached. "Wave to Mama, James." The baby waved his chubby hand enthusiastically, and Thea's heart swelled with love for her 2 men. As they reached the house, Zane dismounted smoothly, never losing his grip on their son, then handed the baby up to her. "How was your ride?" she asked, settling James on her hip. "Perfect." "This young man is going to be a natural horseman," Zane said proudly, tethering his horse to the hitching post before joining them on the porch. He leaned in for a kiss, which she gladly gave. "Like father, like son," she agreed, smoothing the baby's dark hair, which was already showing signs of curling like his father's. "Speaking of sons," Zane said, his hand coming to rest gently on her slightly rounded belly. "How are you feeling today?" "Better." "The morning sickness seems to be easing." She covered his hand with hers. "Mrs. Holloway is convinced it's a girl this time," Zane smiled. "A daughter with her mother's beauty and brains, heaven help me. And her father's stubbornness," Thea teased. "That goes without saying." He took James from her, bouncing the baby gently. "I saw the new schoolteacher in town yesterday. She seems to be settling in well." Thea nodded, a hint of wistfulness in her smile, though she loved being a mother, part of her missed teaching at the Wyatt school. She'd reluctantly stepped down after James was born, knowing that managing the ranch accounts, motherhood, and teaching was too much even for her organizational skills. "Miss Collins is very capable. The children adore her." "Not as much as they adored you," Zane assured her. "Half the town still asks when you'll be coming back." "Maybe when this one is a bit older," she said, patting her belly. "For now, I'm content with tutoring the Jenkins children twice a week." Zane nodded, understanding as always. "Oh, I almost forgot. There was a letter for you in town." He shifted James to one arm and reached into his vest pocket, pulling out an envelope. "From St. Louis." Thea recognized Margaret Ramsey's elegant handwriting immediately. She opened the letter eagerly. She and Margaret had maintained a correspondence since that day 2 years ago, forming an unlikely friendship born from shared adversity. "She's remarried," Thea announced after scanning the letter. "To a professor at Washington University. She sounds very happy." "Good for her," Zane said sincerely. "She deserved better than Ramsey. Speaking of whom," Thea continued, reading further, "she says Edward has moved to California. Apparently his business interests in Missouri collapsed after some questionable dealings came to light." Zane's expression showed little sympathy. "Can't say I'm surprised. Men like that eventually reap what they sow." Thea folded the letter, her thoughts drifting to the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this life. If Ramsey had been honest, if he hadn't deceived her, she would never have met Zane, never have found this happiness. "What is it?" Zane asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "I was just thinking about how things work out," she said. "How something that seemed so terrible at the time led to something so wonderful." He nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. "Life has a way of sorting itself out if you're brave enough to keep moving forward. We've been very fortunate," she said softly. "We've worked hard," he countered, shifting James to his other arm as the baby began to fuss. "And we've made good choices, like the choice to trust each other." "The best choice I ever made," she agreed, leaning into his side. Mrs. Holloway appeared at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Supper's ready, and this little man needs his bath before he eats," she announced, holding her arms out for James, who went to her willingly. "You two take a moment for yourselves. Heaven knows you get few enough of those these days. After she disappeared inside with the baby, Zane pulled Thea into his arms, his hand coming to rest once again on the gentle swell of her belly. "Happy?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "Completely," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." His expression grew serious. "You know, I think about it sometimes how different things might have been if I hadn't been riding by Ramsey's place that day. I believe we would have found each other somehow," Thea said with conviction. "Some things are meant to be." He smiled, the special smile he reserved only for her. "Like us. Exactly like us." She nestled closer into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "A worthless contract led me to the most valuable promise I've ever known." Zane tilted her face up to his eyes full of love. "And I intend to keep that promise every day for the rest of our lives." As the sun set over the land they both loved, casting the world in shades of gold and promise, Thea knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the hearts of those she loved, and who loved her in return. It was a contract more binding than any paper could ever be, sealed not with ink but with love, trust, and the shared journey of two lives intertwined forever.